Thank you so much for joining me today, Eileen, founder of Befriending Death. So, before we go into any direction, I just want to thank you for coming up with such a thoughtful and holistic phrase around death. Like, it's just such a welcoming phrase, befriending death. I think that's really a lot of my intention for this podcast. So, where did the name come from? How did you come up with that?
It was not the easiest thing to come up with. There is a David Whyte poem that he talks about befriending. We will befriend our death, I think is a line. But when I thought about it, I was just trying to think of what is a supportive, inviting, less intimidating kind of topic or name. And, it sounds, some of the names that I was coming up with, I was like, does this sound like a suicide club? And, it's a fine line between like normalizing it and making it casual and, less scary. That's really what I was trying to get at. And I'm really delighted with the name. And then the course name is Let's Chat About Death. And that also, like, it just chatting among community kind of just makes it a little bit more safe and less scary, and we can normalize the conversation around death in that way.
Yeah, and isn't that really what we are kind of tiptoeing with when we talk about death is how do we get people to talk about something that, on a full spectrum of like icky and I don't really want to just reject completely, that's not real, not going to happen. We do have to sort of pick our language very carefully to make them feel invited and also not to come across as morbid. Because I know, when I tell people, oh, I started a podcast, it's called We're All Dying, people are like, what kind of a twisted conversation is that? And so,
Yeah.
I'm going to keep it, I'm going to keep the name, but there is that sort of, if you talk about death, there must be something unhinged about you. And so I just want to commend you and thank you for taking up space in this world with conversations of death and creating opportunities to invite people into that. I would love to know sort of, I typically ask people, what was the first moment in your life or maybe even like your childhood where death became relevant and you sort of recognize that there are living and there are dead. Is there a moment that you can remember?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure before the biggest memory, there was probably, a goldfish at the bazaar, something simple, or the worm or a slug. Um, but really, it was probably my mother's mother who died, she was just like the most amazing being in the whole world. And she died about 2 days before my birthday. I think I might have been around 7 or 9. And, it just crushed me. But my mom, both of my parents, all of my grandparents came from Ireland, where I feel like as a culture, they normalized death. And my mom really was exposed to a lot of death. She was one of 6 kids, and she experienced a lot of loss young. And so that became just the way that she normalized it for me. It really was such a gift. My dad, on the other hand, he was a New York City firefighter and ran into burning buildings and certainly knew, mortality was a factor, but he was kind of on the superstitious side where he never really wanted to talk about death. So it was interesting to have both of them. But I'd say my grandmother was probably the most significant loss as a kid for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so is there anything specific you remember your mother saying to you about it that stuck with you?
Yeah, she felt deeply. And I could say I'm one of 5 kids in my family. So it was, and I'm in the middle. So I had an older sister who was 5 years older than me. And so she, you just get your information from different sources. And my sister said something about heaven, and there's some escalator. It was just some silly version that formed for a kid. And my mom just like didn't shelter any of us from it. And she had already experienced the loss of two siblings before her mom died. One of them was a priest, and he actually studied with Thomas Merton, actually, which I love to know that I'm like one person removed from Thomas Merton, and as a Christian mystic. And then she also lost her sister when she was young. My mom was like a teenager when her sister died, and she was married to someone, but they were not able to have children, so they adopted a baby named Eileen. They were in the foster system at that point, and the adoption hadn't been finalized. And then she got diagnosed with cancer, and she died before the adoption was finalized. And her husband was not able to keep the baby back. This is the 1950s, so antiquated thoughts back then of like a man can't possibly be a single father. So that was a tremendous loss for her too. So we just learned it. We weren't sheltered from it. She would talk about these stories. We would go to the funerals. We would see the dead body in the open casket. And it just became normalized, which I'm grateful for.
Yeah. Well, you've got to have a certain level of that to be able to guide conversations around death and all the different lives that are coming to these conversations. So you spent, a majority of your career as a nurse.
Yes.
Correct? Yeah.
Yes,
So
I still work as a nurse. Yeah.
so how did that influence your experience with death and dying?
Yeah. So my very first job, even before I was actually a registered nurse, I worked at a cancer hospital in New York City. And as the summer before my senior year as a nursing student. And it was a really tough unit to work on. It was a neuro-oncology unit. So the majority of the patients had brain tumors or spinal cord tumors. And I had just the most fabulous nurses to support me. I mean, nurses sometimes can eat their young, they say. And I just really got so lucky with my preceptor and the other nurses, but they would say, "Oh, we've got a good case for you. We've got a tough situation. Go into this room." And I was forced to really be way outside my comfort zone, and yet getting pushed in, but then having like this really amazing supportive community to hold me. And there were plenty of times where I was like, "Okay, we've got postmortem care to be done, Eileen, let's go." And I remember the first postmortem care that I did was someone who was my age. She was a student at Columbia University and was from a foreign country. I can't remember exactly where, but her family was grieving tremendously. She had a spontaneous bleed in her head and had low platelets, so it just came out of nowhere. And all of her bodily orifices were bleeding when we were doing the mortem care. And I just thought like, oh, is this how the body is? Which is not, it was just that was the case in her situation. And the finality of putting the body inside the body bag and then zipping that up, and the face is covered. It was pretty traumatizing for me. It's still difficult for me today. And I work in labor and delivery, and sometimes we're doing that on a neonate. And it's just so final when that bag closes,
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think we think enough about the death part of healthcare for healthcare workers. I think, when we do think about their experiences, we're thinking about how hard it must be to take care of people, right? And all the mess and noise and worry. Like there's so many things, but we don't think about that moment you just shared, which is that final moment of zipping someone up in a bag and what that must feel like. So how has that well, a couple things. Like, so are there, support systems within healthcare that help you kind of move through that and come back to work the next day? Like,
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say there's a lot of room for improvement to support healthcare workers, especially after COVID. When you think of the nurses in New York City in March of 2020, when they were bombarded and the morgues were overflowing, that they needed trucks to be holding the bodies. Before that happened, there were nurses and physicians and nursing assistants and even the housekeeping team. Like, everyone is impacted by that. And we do have social work. We do have, like, an employee hotline. But I have a colleague that I work with where we had a really unexpected, very sad loss of someone who lost their baby, who came in healthy, and the baby died after birth. And we bonded over this case together. And she was a young nurse, but she ultimately ended up leaving nursing. And she went on to get her MBA. And we just recently caught up, and she's now looking at how we can start supporting healthcare workers more, because in COVID, any tech worker, they got sent care packages, they got sent like $1,000 to create their home office, all of, candles, aromatherapy, all these things were sent to these tech workers. And, here we are, frontline workers going into COVID. Sometimes we had PPE, sometimes we didn't. The rules changed every day. I mean, now it seems so far away, that the stress of what we were experiencing, but certainly, like, we are the ones that really needed the support. And it wasn't really there in the same way. I mean, sometimes you might be able to talk to the social worker, or there might be an employee hotline, but there's something about, if you had like 20 mental health days provided for free, that would be such a gift for so many people, and that's not really accessible.
It made me just think about, if someone in your personal life dies, you might take some time to grieve that loss. But as a nurse, you're still losing people, but you don't get a beat, right? You have to just
Yeah.
move on to the next person.
Yeah. I mean, and sometimes it literally, you leave a room and
Yeah.
you dry your eyes and then you go into the next room. And particularly when it's labor and delivery, because no one ever writes their birth plan, to say, like, I'd like to come out of this alive. I'd like my baby to come out of this alive. Like, that's not anywhere on their radar. Um, and there's sometimes times when you're really in this tender moment, and then you walk into another room and someone says something like, this yogurt is not organic. I ordered the organic yogurt. And suddenly you're just like, okay,
What
we
is
have
this
to
in our world?
yeah, yeah. And it's like, yeah, of course she wants her organic yogurt. That's fine. But it's like, in perspective to what you've been experiencing in the previous room, it's hard to take that in sometimes.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, so there's losses at work, but you're also a human being living this life. You have your own death to think about or not think about, and the lives of those that you love and care about. So how has that been different for you? How have you sort of looked at those two lives separately or overlapping when it comes to?
Yeah. Yeah, they're really integrated, because, I was so young. I was so young. I was 20 when I started working with cancer patients, right? And because it was brain tumors, oftentimes the patients didn't look the same as what the pictures on the wall were. And sometimes they were young, you'd see their wedding photo like from 5 years ago. And, the steroids create a moon face, or they have a shaved head, or they've got literally staples in their head, and maybe they can't speak properly. But I just learned really early that life is precious and unpredictable, and it's time to get out there and start living. And that has been a lesson that I learned so young, and I'm still quite adventurous. I appreciate my life. I make time for those that I love. And so I ended up actually working as an adventure guide, taking people on hiking and biking vacations. I'm a big traveler. So it has had a real strong impact. But in addition, since I've been doing Befriending Death for the last year and a half, just whatever you pay attention to grows. So death just kind of works on you without you even noticing. And there's just ways that you make decisions of like, yeah, we don't know, say, I love you now, don't turn away. Oh, there's fear. Okay, let's look at this fear. What's going on here? And is this silly, or should I be doing something with this?
Hmm. So
Like
take us.
I actually was in a very serious accident. I was actually working and doing research on a trail in the Caribbean, and erosion just was happening. And I just took a step and I free fell 30 feet and broke 18 bones in this one fall. And that had a big impact on me. And a few years later, I was turning 50 and I thought, you know what? Like, I'm alive. I might not have been alive in that fall. And so I went big, and I rented 2 houses in wine country. I invited friends out from the East Coast. I paid for some of their flights. I just went big because we never know. And it's like, community is everything. Why not celebrate and spend time with those that you love?
I love that. And so let's get into Befriending Death, the course, and what your hopes are for this experience and what you've experienced already. So how did it start?
Yeah. Yeah, it started with just sending an email to 20 people or so. And I said, this is about not this past January, the previous January. And my mom had just died that November. So this was already in the works, but my mom's death, kind of provided a little bit more impetus for me. And I said, I'm going to just try this out. If any of you are willing to be my guinea pigs, I'd love it. And it was a 6-session course, and it's still a 6-session course. It evolves a little bit. I change it every so often with new materials. But basically, we meet on Zoom, and we meet every other week with me. And then I deliver homework to them. We're meeting on Zoom. I deliver them homework, and in the form of documentaries, some reading, a book. Sometimes there's like exercises like writing your own obituary or walking through a cemetery, journaling, and then they have a small buddy group. So in that small buddy group, they're able to just normalize their concerns, be in a small, safe community. And then we come back and we digest it all in a larger group. And then you hear different perspectives on things. So we talk about, what our own relationship is with death and dying, what's our relationship with aging and sickness and accidents. And then what are our own wishes, and who would we want to be our healthcare proxy? And have we had those conversations? And are they documented? And so then once after we've done that work for ourselves, then we can have that conversation with others, like our parents or grandparents or children or colleagues. And then we talk a bit about grieving. And then really the gem of the course is that reflecting on death causes people to change the way they're living. And that's always manifested in its own unique way. Some people at the end of the course are like, I realized I was drinking too much and I don't want to be living my life this way, so I stopped drinking. And someone else, when they wrote their obituary, their partner that they were living with didn't make it into their obituary. So it was like, yeah, no, I'm not in that relationship anymore. And someone else created their end of life, he's young, he's like maybe 30 years old. And he's like, yeah, no, it's going to be a freaking party at my funeral. And I'm going to have trivia games, and I'm going to mishmash my friends so that they have to all intermingle, because somebody will remember me from my childhood. Someone else will know me from work. So you hear different perspectives, and it's so inspiring to me. I just love it.
Absolutely. And so has there been something that was really surprising about it? You're sort of experimenting, you're taking somewhat strangers together to talk about a topic that maybe some of them have been excited to talk about, but many of them have not really gone deep into it. Are there some outcomes that really surprised you?
Yeah, because it was really a test. And then what I realized is that it's making me come alive more. This is work that feels like soul work for me. So that's really meaningful to me to realize, like, I actually want to dig into this more. So there was that realization this year of like recommitting and double downing on it, because I wasn't sure, I can spend my time in many different ways at the hospital or, as a guide. And what I realized is that these small little buddy groups, they love each other. They go into these deep places that they have these conversations that they can't have with other people. So some of them have been continuing to meet even after the course is over. And I thought, okay, I've got to commit to this and help support and foster community. So actually this week, this is early June, I created a book club. So as you know, you're coming. So we've got a book club on, this evening, and then we've got an online happy hour on Friday. And then we've got an in-person potluck, which is the very first one on Saturday in the Bay Area in San Francisco, where a lot of people seem to be coming out of. So it feels really fun. It feels exciting to be putting community into this.
Yeah, it makes such a difference when a topic that starts as sort of like, is there something strange about me for wanting to talk about this? And then you realize you have a whole community of people, and the community is not connected over sadness or grief. It's actually joy and celebration. And of course, those things are present, but you're really having a great time together.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what comes out of the course is these people, they're like, well, I just told my mom that I'm like loving my death and dying class. And she's like, what are you talking about? Like similar to what you're experiencing, Jenna.
Yeah. And so do you have other visions for how you want to see this evolve?
Yeah, that's a good question. What I want to make sure is that I don't overwork, number one, because I have workaholic tendencies, and I've worked really hard, the last 33 years as a nurse. But I teach mindfulness meditation, and there's this lovely woman who she just recently sent me an email to say, Eileen, after I took your course, I signed up for this program called A Year to Live, which I also help facilitate a course on that. And she said, but I dropped out and I realized I need you to be teaching this to me. And I thought, oh God, can I commit to a year-long program to teach? But I brought in new facilitators who I know from my mindfulness community. And I think as a team, then we can offer more support. And I think in the future, there will be a year-long program. It won't be A Year to Live, but it'll be something that comes out of Befriending Death.
I love it. Um, is there one thing that you think that listeners should talk to either themselves or others about as it relates to death? If there's like a starting point for them, have you seen some areas of the conversation as like easier access points? Like, is it easier to get someone to think about a will before they think about their obituary? Is there something that you think is like a good starting point for people who really are just starting to dip their toe into conversations of death?
Yeah, I think obituaries are hard for most people. I did have somebody do his obituary with chat GPT. And what I do say to people when they're thinking about doing obituary and they're meeting resistance, I just say, make it up. Make it wacky, like you died in a circus accident or something, just to make it a practice. It doesn't have to really hit home in a big way. And I think a will is also really hard. When people come in to have a baby at the hospital, I literally have that conversation with them, because you're going to be bringing a child into your life. You could both be on a plane and die, right? So who's going to take care of that child, right? So just the mere basics of that. But a lot of people don't want to look at it. So those two are hard. And that's what's great about this course, is that you're doing hard stuff, but you're doing it with a lot of other people together. But like an easier entry point would be something like, Tina Turner just died. Wow. What do you think about that? What do you think about her life? And like, there's people dying every day. You can just look at that. Or, when Anne Hesh died, she didn't have a will, I believe. Like you can make conversation just around what's showing up in the public news. Or you can just say, what was your first recollection of death? And because everyone has something like that, even people who haven't been exposed to a lot of personal death, it could have been the goldfish at the bazaar, but I think one of the really interesting places to start talking about death is around the right to die, death with dignity. And it feels really controversial. And when things become controversial, I suddenly get much more interested in it because there's some juice there. And I'm really happy to hear all perspectives on it. And of course, there's lots of people that think it's crazy to enact. And I don't know that I would enact it for myself. Of course, you don't know until you're in that situation. But we include a few films in the course that bring that up, and it's really powerful. There's a lot of states that are getting on board with that now, and it's a wonderful opportunity for people who want to use that choice. And the other area that feels kind of edgy is the use of psychedelics in end of life. And I feel really passionate about that, because if there is fear and anxiety around death and dying, why not minimize that? And there's great research coming out of Hopkins and NYU and UCSF. So I'm really looking into exploring more of that myself. Yeah.
Those are great intros, because they don't feel as personal maybe for some people, right? They can kind of objectify the people they're talking about who might be making these decisions, but it doesn't have to personally, get to that core of what am I going to do with my things when I die, or what do I want people to say about me? It's a bit removed, but it's still relevant, and it can lead to other areas. Who do you think that your course is for? Befriending Death. Who should take that
Yeah,
course?
that's really good question. It's actually for everybody. It's for anybody and everybody. I've had, what I really love is that I didn't expect to have so many young people take this course. And part of it is that I have a lot of young people in my community because of my outdoor guiding. I'm kind of an older guide where most of them are in their 20s and 30s. And we've had our community's been touched by death. We had like two super dynamic women die at a young age, like 29 and 33, and one died in a plane crash. Another one died biking and was hit and died instantly on her bike. And that, sudden death like that when you're living an adventurous lifestyle, that just will show up. And even in COVID, I have someone in my course right now, one of her best friends had just run a marathon. She was a twin, and I don't know, she might've been late 20s and was super healthy. And she got COVID early, well before the vaccines. And she died a very early death from being a very healthy person. And it doesn't make sense. So how do you explain that? How do you explain death when it feels like it's come too early? So I do have a number of people who are in their 20s and 30s. I have right now in this current course, I have two families taking it together, which is
Wow.
so gorgeous. It's this one man, he said, I want to take this course. And he thought about it and he thought, I'm going to have my parents and my sister do this with me together. And then there's another woman who's doing it with her two daughters, and they're like in their early 20s, because their cousin is a 5-year-old with chronic illness. And, they want to find a way to cope with that. I've had people take the course with terminal illness. I had a young guy in his early 40s who was living with stage 4 lung cancer, and it makes things really real, for for him, he was really grounded in this and was taking it in. But when people are signing up because, maybe they're in their 30s or 40s and they're signing up because they want to be prepared for their parents, and then they have this reflection of like, damn, this could happen to me, if this person is this age. So, and of course I have people in their 70s I've had an 86-year-old take the course who said, I want to die laughing. I'm taking this course to die laughing. But it's funny, even the 70 somethings were signing up for their parents, and it's like, okay, no, you could be preparing for yourself too. So yeah.
This is so great. I'm so glad I found you so early on in this journey. So I'm definitely going to be taking the course. September, I think, is the next one.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Before we go, is there anything you want to share about living life, dying well, things to do before you die? Anything you want to share with people?
Yeah. Let's see. I just think, when you can allow life to provide you the lessons in the little deaths, that can be a way to ease in, noticing, the changing in the seasons, like when the snow is melting into slush, that's like an ending of a season, or the leaves falling off the trees. The saying goodbye, when there's these little endings, saying goodbye. When I was a volunteer at Zen Hospice Project, and we would close our shift with a meditation, and we would sign off to the next shift. And there'd be a check and balance where it was like, did you say goodbye to Joe? And if there was a way that you were like trying to avoid saying goodbye, they would kind of call you on your volunteer mates. So, really like acknowledging endings. And for me, in order to put more energy into befriending death, I had to end a lot of my meditation groups that I was leading. And it was very painful. And yet at the same time, it was so beautiful that we could acknowledge our love for each other and our appreciation for each other. But it takes a little bit of courage to stay present for the goodbyes. So
Wow.
that's an ongoing practice for me.
Eileen, that's such an easy gift that you just gave us that we can immediately just start to look at. So I want to say goodbye to you, and I want to say thank you with so much gratitude for all the work that you're doing and for taking time today to be with us and to share your experiences and insight.
Well, thanks, Shanna. It's really nice to be walking the same path with you and making this more normal for people. So yeah, I look forward to keeping this friendship going.